Budget numbers from the governor's office tonight show us the state is even deeper in debt than first thought.
From the hall of the House of Representatives at the state capitol, after a stunning upset to Democratic control of the state Senate.
State lawmakers working at the Capitol right now, trying to finally pass a budget. They hope to do that tonight.
This budget is, as all budgets are, a product of compromise.
We have to start somewhere, and we have to start with some serious decisions.
When I try to get people to understand how bad the situation is in Connecticut, I ask them to think of the state budget sort of like a small fenced-in backyard, a fixed area. And there's some crabgrass in the backyard. That represents the cost of these retirement benefits and a few other debt costs. 20 years ago, they ate up 12% of the backyard. And by the way, in this strained analogy, wherever the crabgrass is, you can't use it. Well, now the crabgrass is already eating up 33% of the backyard. And some of these expenses are going to grow dramatically. The amount of money we have to put into the pension fund for municipal school teachers is projected in one report over the next 15 years to grow about 525%. One line item in the state budget, that's about 33% a year. In other words, the crabgrass is exploding, folks. And what it's doing is it's forcing other things out of the budget. We're already seeing it's squeezing education aid out of the budget. It's going to keep squeezing it. At the same time, this argument about redistributing education aid isn't going away.
So what made this budget particularly difficult is the fact that the state's in a multi-billion-dollar deficit. And so if you have a deficit, whether you're a municipality or a school district or a state, you need to actually fill that deficit in. There's only two ways to do it. You either have to raise revenue or you have to cut spending. And that's been the argument between the parties as well as between the governor and the legislature. It hasn't been purely partisan or party politics in the state, because at times the legislature has agreed, but then they haven't agreed with the governor. And so it's really nobody agreeing with anybody. Municipalities don't agree with the state doesn't agree with municipalities. It's been a very, very difficult scenario.
When you think about the fact that this was just the first of probably 2 decades worth of ugly budget cycles, that each one gets much, much worse. And as the pressure goes up, the bipartisan cooperation tends to crack. And all signs are the pressure is going to keep intensifying.
The last 2 months have been a mess with the legislature, but the problem has been caused over 70 years or 80 years. I think the governor said yesterday we're going to lose a lot of jobs if we can't resolve these things. And of course that affects our towns too, because our towns depend on the economic health of the state. We're part of the state, and we just can't keep going in this uncertain manner. The Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance of both towns have been working very hard to figure out what we're going to do with all this uncertainty.
The board members have worked, the committee members rather, have worked very, very diligently.
As I said, we also have talked to the superintendent and to the board members about finding ways that they can make some cuts in this year that we're in already.
In the last 3 months, we've tried to control spending in order to keep finances under control so that we could react when the budget finally was passed by the state. We had a spending cap in place and we had a hiring freeze in place. Only positions that were absolutely necessary to run schools were hired. And so we have a couple positions, custodian, guidance counselor at the elementary level, a couple other positions that have stayed open that normally would have been hired. And then we have a spending cap on that hasn't affected the way schools have run, I don't believe. It's based on a belief that schools should only buy the supplies and materials they need to run the first third of the school year. And then they can buy the other supplies later in the school year. The idea was just don't pre-spend too much so that we had as control over as much of our spending as possible.
What we're going to do is bring in some poems by Langston Hughes, whom you'll notice has taken a nap. He is not over here right now.
The budget hasn't affected me personally yet, although I will say that every department is probably going to need to tighten its budget. And as someone who buys a few hundred books for my classroom, I'm always happy when I have more money to spend. I don't anticipate having that luxury this year, which curtails what my students have the opportunity to read and pick independently for themselves.
The decrease isn't as great as I feared that it would be. There still is a decrease in the funding. I guess good news this time is that we have a little bit more time to be able to prepare for that and look at things. We have to make sure that we're doing what we need to do for the district. However, with the declining enrollment, we are looking at different options of things to see how we can try to save some funds and not in the process sacrifice on any of the education that we're receiving. Because one of the greatest benefits to our community is our school system. I moved here 28 years ago for the school system, many people do. So we just want to make sure that, we're able to continue what we've been doing.
With the budget being passed, now we know a little bit more, but we don't know as much as we'd like. I know that's a little vague, but that's sort of the way it's been with the state for the last 6 months. The budget has been passed, and there's various predictions and projections that have been run. They warned us that all the projections we had seen were unofficial and that we shouldn't make too many decisions too quickly. But we're counting on that those numbers are at least in the right neighborhood. We at one point were looking at a possibility of losing over $2 million. And so the idea of losing $200,000 is certainly not ideal, but it appears to be manageable.
The underfunding of what's been going on for a very long time, and the number that they've been using to inflate the dollars.
I think people are really scared. It's been really, it's been on the news every day now that we have a budget, and I think that the economics of the state of Connecticut are really concerned. Haddam and Killingworth aren't unique in what we're facing right now, and we're considered a wealthy town, and even though we're a very small community. So we're looking at some options, we're looking at some things we can do with the town budget. I can say that we're working collaboratively with the Board of Education and the Board of Finance from both towns, and in talking to Howard Theory and the board, it looks like there's some options of things that we can do. But we obviously need to discuss them, we need to see the impact of the community and how that's going to affect everyone, because again, we really don't want to sacrifice the quality of the education that we have here. I think it's important for people to pay attention to what's going on in the community. I think it's important for people to voice their opinion. I think that the leaders of both Haddam and Killingworth and even the state of Connecticut need to know how people feel. I know in talking to a lot of people that they're scared. They're worried about their taxes, they're worrying about how to be able to afford to live here, they're worried about their kids being able to afford to live here in this community. So I think the more that we focus on that and we look at that, I think we'll come up with some really good results.